So I'd like to start by giving a brief introduction to what the new standard was and why my co-founder Brian Dominic and I started the project back in 2003. To do so, I'd like to quote loosely from a piece that Brian wrote several years ago after we shut down the new standard, because I think his words sum it up the best. Quote, "In mid-2003, the US military was plowing steadily into Iraq, goaded on by a pro-war corporate media. Stateside, the federal government was ravaging civil rights in the name of national security, as reporters did their best to scare the population into complacency. And in the background, the economy was eroding the quality of life for families and communities across the country, while wealthy elites accrued unprecedented fortunes, and the daily headlines heralded a, quote, recovery. The failure of corporate news outlets to serve the public interest seemed as obvious as ever, and the US lacked reliable, non-ideological alternatives. We heard what we thought was a cry for a better, more responsible media, especially from activists engaged in social movements whose messages were stifled in the mainstream. Our answer was the New Standard, a nonprofit, truly independent hard news website. The New Standard was more than a news outlet. It embodied our most basic hopes for a better society, one in which journalists would focus on the truly relevant and important, in which the voices and experiences of those most affected by events were heard, and in which workplaces resist oppressive hierarchies and become vehicles for personal and collective empowerment," end quote. It's that last point that I want to focus on this afternoon. There were many ways that the New Standard put radical values into practice. Our funding model was based on the idea that no one should profit from news production, just as Mike just talked about. We took no money from sources other than our readers. The New Standard's reporting was radical in that it asked not just who, what, when, and where, but also why. Our journalism sought to get to the root causes of the issues we reported on. It humanized and contextualized events and policies, and it adhered to the strictest standards of accuracy. But it was our workplace where I experienced liberty, empowerment, solidarity, and equity in ways I never had before and never have since. And that continues to inspire me the most. As the global capitalist economy experiences this latest of crises, more and more people are questioning the system. Every day I hear people around me wondering if maybe this economic system we're living under is the problem. But time again, I also hear people say there are no alternatives. Basically, they say, capitalism is bad, but anything else could be worse. And what would that anything else be anyway? The New Standard's workplace structure was built on the principles of an economic model that Mike developed with Robin Hanel. It's called participatory economics, or PERICON for short. The fundamentals of this economic vision stem from the desire to design an economy that promotes equity, solidarity, self-management, and diversity. PERICON is a vision for a large-scale economic system, including changes to the process of production, pricing, and redistribution. Our workplace at the New Standard was derived from just one facet of a participatory economy, the workplace. In the PERICON workplace, the main vehicles for equity, solidarity, self-management, and diversity are equal pay for equal work, as measured by effort and sacrifice, self-managed and collective decision-making based on the principle that people get proportionate say over decisions to the extent that they are affected by them, jobs that contain an equitable mixture of empowering and onerous tasks, and diversity of voices, inputs, and outcomes in the process. Brian and I were both heavily inspired by this model, and we figured, well, let's see if this model actually delivers on its promises. This sounds like a place we'd really like to work, and if it is, maybe it will inspire others to build similar workplaces. Of course, one tiny news organization cannot demonstrate whether a proposed economic system has merit. But if we want to change a society to embody better values, we have to start somewhere. And what I want to stress today is that we can start. We don't need to hold on until capitalism collapses under its own weight. We don't need to convince the majority to switch over to a new system. We can start now, in our own workplaces, in our own activist organizations, or anywhere where we work in groups to get things done. So okay, you're probably thinking, okay, that's enough of the rhetoric. Give me the goods. Tell me what you did and how it worked. So here's the nuts and bolts. At its height, the new standard had 6 full-time staff members. It should be noted here that the staff did not work all in the same location. We were scattered throughout the country. We did most of our discussing through conference calls, emails, chats, and the occasional face-to-face retreat. All staff members were automatically part of the staff collective as soon as they were hired. The collective was the decision-making body of the organization. In a chapter I wrote for the book Real Utopia, which was edited by Chris Spanos, I describe our decision-making process in great detail, and I'm happy to describe it in even more excruciating detail if you want to hear about it. But right now, I'll just give you the rundown. The main goal of our decision-making process was to engage all participants in order to account for diverse views and opinions and arrive at the most widely agreeable or acceptable outcomes. The greater the impact the decision had on the organization, the more collective acceptance it needed. And the more a decision would impact one individual member of the collective, the more acceptance it needed from that individual. In order to accomplish this, we used many different methods. For some decisions, we used consensus. Sometimes we voted. Sometimes, if numbers were involved, say for decisions about the budget, we split the difference. And sometimes, if we couldn't immediately agree between more than one option, we just implemented more than one option. You might imagine that we must have had a lot of meetings to collectively make all the decisions necessary to run a news organization. And you would be right. We had short daily meetings to discuss which story ideas we would pursue and who would pursue them. We had weekly staff meetings to discuss any larger logistical or content issues that came up during the week. And we also held staff retreats a few times a year, during which we discussed things we needed larger blocks of time, or things that we just needed to be able to talk about face-to-face. The task of creating agendas and facilitating the meetings rotated among all staff. You might say it sounds inefficient to take up so much staff time in meetings instead of using it for reporting, editing, or fact-checking. At the new standard, no one wanted to be in meetings. We would all rather be publishing. But we recognized that we usually made better decisions as a group than any one of us would make on our own, especially when it came to content production. Having a number of diverse people contributing to a decision about which stories we would pursue, how we would pursue them, and which sources we would contact, helping to provide context and historical analysis, and helping reporters if they got stuck on a story, provided an incredible depth to our content. Instead of eliminating meetings, our meeting aversion incentivized us to come to decisions as quickly as possible. We all learned to compromise and pick our battles. We learned to figure out what was important to us and to trust our coworkers' instincts and abilities. And every once in a while, we had really long, hard discussions about items that spoke to our values or our fundamental desires for where the organization was going. And in those cases, collective decision-making was really hard. But speaking for myself, I learned immensely about other people and about myself during times like that. And that was an invaluable experience that I have carried with me into my other activist work since. Another aspect of the new standard experience that I have carried into my other activist work is the concept of the balanced job complex. This is a concept that's discussed a lot in the participatory economics vision. A balanced job complex, in brief, is a mix of tasks that together make up a worker's job. The idea is that for each worker, some of the tasks are very empowering, some of them are boring, and some are in between. And that if you are to compare the mix for one worker against the mixes that other workers are working in the collective, there should be an equitable distribution of empowering and mind-numbing tasks across the whole collective. If you want to have a truly democratic workplace, you cannot have some workers hoarding empowering and important tasks while others are relegated to the boring and undesirable work. This is exactly what Mike was just talking about. Empowering and important work changes the person who does it. It increases confidence, access to information, and a person's sense of their own worth within the organization. If the distribution of these types of tasks is not roughly equal within your collective, some workers will likely be more confident, they will likely have more access to the information needed to make good decisions, and they and their coworkers will likely consider them less replaceable, which provides that worker with unfair leverage. When some workers have more power and leverage than others, your collective becomes democratic in name, but not in practice. At the new standard, all staff members worked a balanced job complex. There are many ways to figure out how to divide and distribute work so that empowerment is equalized. The way we chose was to divide work into 4 categories: management, content production, administration, and something we called conmin, which I'll explain in a minute. The management category covered work related to decision making. It included time in collective and committee meetings, as well as time preparing meeting agendas. It also included work that members undertook when writing policy proposals and other solo work related to managing the organization. The content production category included reporting, editing, website development, producing New Standard Radio, and other tasks that had to do with creating the content of the publication itself. The administrative area covered most of the basic behind-the-scenes drudge work: bookkeeping, answering email, providing technical support to website users, promoting the New Standards articles to other websites, opening the snail mail, answering the phone, cutting and pasting website text and computer code, taking meeting notes, etc. And the conmin area was something we developed at some point after we'd been operating for a while, and we were trying to divide these tasks up, and we realized there was a category of tasks that were less desirable than most content work, but more empowering than most administrative work. And we wanted to make sure that kind of work was balanced across the collective as well. This category included activities like writing text for fundraising drives, fact-checking, and putting together the member newsletter. Once we had the work divided into these categories, we assigned tasks in such a way that each staff person had roughly the same number of hours in each kind of category. It wasn't always perfect, but we tried to remedy any inequalities by rotating tasks or assigning temporary tasks based on who needed certain kinds of tasks to be in balance with the rest of the collective. Just to give you an example of what a balanced job complex might look like, I'll describe what mine looked like. My primary content work was editing, since I was the first editor for most of the articles at the New Standard. I also did a fair amount of reporting and news writing. My management work was like everyone else's in the collective. I attended regular staff meetings, I prepared agendas, and I facilitated when it was my turn. My administrative work was mostly spent being the organization's bookkeeper and in-house accountant. And my conmin work included fact-checking, posting content to the website, and other random tasks. Other staff members had different mixes, especially when it came to content production. Many other staff members' content work was primarily focused on reporting rather than editing. While all New Standard journalists did some editing work because we edited each other's articles, most spent the majority of hours researching, interviewing, and writing. This way we were able to specialize our skills, to get good at our primary tasks, while at the same time overlapping a little when appropriate so that we understood each other's jobs and created redundancy of skills in the organization. The balanced job complex is a concept that I have encouraged other organizations I'm involved with to consider as a solution to some of the chronic problems they have experienced in their workplaces. In my hometown of Syracuse, New York, I'm on the steering committee, which is like a kind of a board of directors of a radical anti-war organization. The organization is 75 years old and has a tradition of challenging hierarchical workplaces. The current staff of 4 operates as a collective. Everyone is paid the same hourly wage and decisions are made collectively. But lately they have experienced some tensions around the division of labor in the organization. Some people think they are doing too much administrative or mind-numbing work. Some staff members think there is an unfair balance of empowering work and skill-building work. And as a result, some are suggesting that there should be a pay differential because some staff are taking more responsibility than others in the organization. And some staff are feeling like they have no avenue for personal growth because there's no emphasis on that in the organization. I've suggested that implementing balanced job complexes may solve some of these problems, and they are in the process of categorizing and redistributing their tasks. I wish they were far enough along that I could report to you on what the results are, but I do have some predictions based on my own experience. When all the members and a staff agree that jobs should be balanced, it becomes a priority to share skills and make sure everyone is growing and becoming more and more competent at their jobs. It also incentivizes everyone to look for ways to cut down on the amount of rote and boring tasks in the organization. When you know that you're going to be doing an equal share of all the boring work in the organization, you work harder to eliminate it or to innovate around it than you would if you could just assign it to an intern or an assistant. Everyone's job becomes transparent, and when there's transparency and balance, it diminishes opportunities for scapegoating, jealousy, and bitterness between workers. These are just some of the nice side effects I experienced while working at the new standard, and I believe they would be experienced by workers in other organizations who would choose to implement this kind of division of labor. So far, I've talked about a lot of things that I loved about working in a workplace organized around the principles of participatory economics. But of course, there were huge challenges, and I'd like to talk about some of those. The first one is probably obvious. The kind of workplace I'm talking about requires well-rounded and skilled individuals, and when you're a small cash-strapped organization like we were, every single person is vital. You don't have a lot of room to train people. You must hire people who are already at least basically good at a variety of tasks you need done in the organization. The U.S. educational system, from elementary school all the way up to college level, is not designed to prepare people to work in a collectively run news organization. We needed people who were not only good writers with good values, but we needed people capable of managing themselves, who were good at communicating with their coworkers about important organizational issues, and who brought other specialized skills to the table, such as fundraising, bookkeeping, and website development. Oh yeah, and they had to be willing to work a grueling schedule for about $22,000 a year. We spent hundreds of staff hours looking for good candidates, and we sometimes left positions unfilled for months while we took on extra work until we found someone. I do believe that the skills we needed are teachable, and in a larger organization, it would have been possible to hire people with the intention of training them. But for us, where each member had to pull an incredible amount of weight from their very first day, this presented a huge challenge. During the preparation phase for the project in late 2003, Brian and I wrote most of the policies that governed the new standard workplace. We wrote the first draft of the Content Contributors Handbook, which laid out the journalistic standards followed by all the reporters and editors. This handbook is actually available on the Rebellious Media Conference website if you want to download it. And our first draft was later adapted by the whole collective after a couple years of experience working with the standards. Brian and I also wrote out our decision-making process, which was a fairly detailed document defining the process by which we made decisions as a collective. Requiring agreement to this document before anyone can join the collective probably saved us hundreds of staff hours arguing about how we were going to go about making decisions. But we overlooked something big in our preparations. We did not set up a process for holding members accountable when they did something wrong. In hindsight, this seems obvious. I think back on it now, and I can't believe we overlooked the fact that in an organization with no bosses, we needed a system for self and collective discipline to deal with the cases when one on the staff acted in ways that had bad impacts on the coworkers or the organization as a whole. Our bylaws set up ways that the collective could fire a member, but short of firing, we had no method. This example illustrates the importance of careful planning, as well as the importance of having a good framework for improvising when you realize that you haven't thought of everything ahead of time. The absence of a process to hold coworkers accountable for their actions could have been the new standard's undoing. But as it was, we were lucky enough to make it through with just a few headaches. Designing an accountability system became a collective endeavor that took many, many hours of discussion and debate. We reached out to other organizations that were sort of like us, that were collectives and were not hierarchical, to ask for advice. And we didn't get a lot of help, other than the reassurance that we were not alone in needing a solution. It took us months of meetings squeezed in between daily publishing deadlines to finally arrive at a policy we were all comfortable with. But eventually we did agree on a policy, and when we put it to use, it worked. The details of the new standard accountability policy, as it was called, are fairly complicated, but I'm not going to go into them now, but if you want to, I can email you our document if you're having issues like this in your organization. The gist of the policy was that it was based on the idea that disciplinary action should vary in severity according to how much the violator's actions affected his or her coworkers in the organization. Quote-unquote punishments ranged from requiring the violator to write an apology, to requiring additional training, to requiring some kind of reparative action, all the way up to firing. And whenever possible, it encouraged self-management in the form of asking the violator to propose his or her own discipline. I learned a valuable lesson from this experience, and it wasn't just that I should have written a policy back in 2003. I do wish that I had written such a policy, and I do advise anyone thinking about setting up a similar organization to create an accountability policy before it is ever needed. The big lesson for me was that the values underlying the participatory economics model really do provide a roadmap for meeting inevitable challenges like this. Because everyone in the collective agreed that we should be upholding these principles, we had a shared vocabulary and some shared goals to help us reach agreement. And the policy that we ultimately agreed to, I believe, was more creative and better than anything Brian and I would have come up with on our own, largely due to the diversity of minds and the energy that was put into it. For those of you wondering why the new standard did not continue publishing, we ultimately shut down because of lack of readership and therefore funding, probably due to poor outreach and marketing methods. It was not our strong suit. We weren't very good at it. Even though the new standard did not survive, I'm still so proud of what we did accomplish. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to learn from this experience. I was 24 years old when we began publishing on New Year's Day 2004. Brian was just a bit older than I, and we pretty much had no money between us. For the first year, we worked on sweat equity, and we lived off part-time work elsewhere. We came so far in the 3.5 years that the new standard published, and our organization met challenges we never could have imagined. So what I want to leave you with today is encouragement. If you're thinking about starting an organization that embodies your vision for a better society, or thinking about making changes in your own institutions to better align them with your values, you should do it. And if you're not thinking about it, you should think about it. If we're going to make the necessary changes in our societies, we have to build new institutions. And we must build them in ways that inspire people and show them that another way is possible.